I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 48. Wired. 26th of August, 1990. Situation Room. White House, Washington, D.C. Everyone on the President's National Security Advisor team was present, as well as some additional folks that could contribute to the conversation. The President was not happy. Everyone was exhausted from the lack of sleep and the gallons of coffee being drunk. Once the President took his seat, he looked at Lieutenant Colonel Atwell. "All right, Colonel, let's get started." "Good morning, Mr. President. Atwell did not get to finish. "Good. What's so damn good about it? Tell me," the President barked angrily. Before Colonel Atwell could respond, the President broke into a wide grin. "Gotcha, Colonel." Colonel Atwell's face revealed that the President had truly gotten him this morning. "You did, sir," Atwell responded with a look that said he wasn't sure if he was happy or mad. "Okay, let's get started," said the President. "And no more long faces around this table. The world isn't ending. This too shall pass, and in the words of Captain John Paul Jones, I have not yet begun to fight." He recalled the quote from his training as a naval officer during World War II. The last several days had been incredibly tough on the men in this room and the country they represented. The stories written by a couple of reporters who had managed to get themselves inside the battle space were truly terrifying. Some of the images they'd smuggled out only reinforced the terror of the battle that had been fought. The President felt it was important to try to change the tone of the meeting before it got going. Colonel Atwell cleared his throat and began. "Sir, in the last 48 hours, some significant events have occurred. The 2nd Republican Guard Corps continues its attack westward. 2 days ago, the 7th Motorized Division finished capturing the holy city of Medina against the Saudi National Guard. They're claiming in the media that they have liberated the Islamic holy city from a corrupt king who has prostituted his country and his people to the west and is now begging the infidels to save him. Saddam is still trying to sway the Arab world into thinking he's a liberator and not a conqueror." "Ha, fat chance of that," Mr. Sununu said. "He just took over the UAE." Continuing, Atwell explained, "The 5th Republican Guard Mechanized Division, along with the 21st Armored Brigade, attacked the 82nd Airborne Division along its defensive line in 2 places. With the addition of the 101st Attack Helicopter Battalion and a lot of close air support from the Air Force and the Navy, the 82nd was able to hold the position and destroyed a significant portion of the 5th Republican Guard Division in the process. Some elements of the 21st Armored Brigade attempted to slip south and bypass the 82nd, but were soundly beaten back by the 8th Saudi Mechanized Brigade. Much to our horror, the 2nd Republican Guard Corps employed mustard gas against one of the paratroopers' positions. Thankfully, the paratroopers had prepared for this possibility, and while they weren't expecting it, they responded exceptionally well to it. As a result, they sustained very few casualties from the attack. With the battle over for the time being, the 82nd is doing their best to strengthen their lines and prepare for round 2 should it come," Colonel Atwell said. "I still can't believe the Iraqis used mustard gas. It makes no sense to use it, and then use it in only a small area, so you don't even gain any real advantage from it. Putting that aside, what kind of casualties did we sustain during the battle?" the President asked as he looked around the room. General Powell answered, "Sir, Lieutenant General Luck, the 15th Airborne Commander, just sent us their initial figures a few hours ago. I must warn you, they are high. In the single-day battle, the 82nd Airborne and the supporting units fighting with them sustained 3,248 casualties. Of that number, 1,492 are listed as killed in action. No one said anything for a moment. They were trying to digest the magnitude of the casualties from the battle. It wasn't something they were prepared for or something they had expected. "My God, those are World War II kind of single-day losses," James Baker said softly. The president, who seemed a bit taken aback by what Powell had just said, asked, "How could we have suffered so many casualties in a single day of combat?" "Sir, you have to keep in mind that our single division with a few supporting elements was standing in the way of more than 50,000 Iraqi soldiers. Had it not been for the enormous level of air support from the Navy and Air Force, we likely would have lost the battle and most of the 82nd. As it is, we need to have a tough conversation about the future of that division and whether we keep them there or redeploy them. They're not out of danger yet," Powell said. "I see," the president said, a bit more somber than before. Turning to Atwell, he said, "Please, Colonel, continue with the brief and bring us up to speed on things before we come back to this." Nodding, Atwell explained, "Sir, in the northwest, the 2nd Iraqi Army Corps, with 2 divisions and possibly a 3rd, is pushing down from the north with only the 10th Saudi Mechanized Brigade delaying it, along with air assets from the USS Saratoga. A U.S. tactical air control party is with the 10th Saudi Brigade and has been hitting them hard, but they continue to move towards Medina. If they can link up with the other divisions, that'll place between 8 and 9 divisions in Medina. Our naval air assets have taken some heavy losses among the A-6 Intruder and FA-18 Hornet fleets. The 2nd Army Corps is traveling over some open ground so they can disperse their forces better. They also have good air defense coverage, as well as a fighter cap. It seems the Iraqis have acquired a lot more Russian-made SA-6 systems than we had originally known about. We're seeing more of them than are usually found in a force structure for an Iraqi division. We're also seeing a lot more T-72s and BTR-70s and even BTR-80s than we would have expected." The president turned to the director of the CIA. "How does this square with your previous reports on the Russians supplying them with new equipment?" "Sir, it's a matter of scope. The Russians supplied Saddam with some equipment to make up for what he lost in the Iran-Iraq war, and we monitored several Russian ships coming into the port of Qasr and offloading some heavy equipment, but it was all under wraps, and our analysts weren't able to get a firm grip on the numbers involved. At this point, we only know that it was a lot more than we previously thought," the director said, not looking directly at the president but at his notes. "I got a feeling you best tell your analysts to take another look at that," the president said in less than a joking tone. "Continue, Colonel." "Sir, in the east, the 1st Republican Guard Corps is reinforcing its positions around Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Al Ain, and Qayyam, with a division in each location. One brigade, which we were able to hit hard with airstrikes from our carrier in the Arabian Sea, is sitting in Salwa, Saudi Arabia, being refitted." "Sir, if I may," General Powell interrupted, "it appears that they want to shut down the ports that the UAE could offer us and protect themselves from the most likely avenue of approach for our eventual counterattack. They've left the right flank open using the empty quarter as too difficult for us to traverse. The president cut him off. "The what? What is this empty quarter?" he asked, his curiosity piqued now. "Sir, that's the southern and southeastern portion of Saudi Arabia. Nothing exists out there except large sand dunes and one paved road that's covered the majority of time by shifting sand. The dunes are perpendicular to our advance and would be very difficult to cross over by any force, especially a mechanized or armor force. Our best avenue is to attack out of Muscat and Oman and through the UAE." "Jim, are we still on track with the government in Oman to use their facilities?" the president asked. "Sir, I speak almost daily with the Prime Minister, and it's a go for us to use their facilities. I believe we have people en route currently to begin the process of identifying what facilities are available where and what we're going to need to stage out of there, Jim Baker said. Sir, General Schwarzkopf is in Muscat at this time with his logisticians, determining what those facilities are and where. That information will be sent back to the Joint Staff, and we can get things moving in earnest, Mr. Cheney explained. What's the status of the initial package that General Schwarzkopf asked for? Mr. President, forces are moving at this time. The 82nd Airborne Division has 100% of the division deployed to Jeddah. The 101st Airborne Division has deployed one attack helicopter battalion and has 30% of its force in the air en route to Jeddah as well, but will be moving to Yanbu, north of Jeddah. Future flights and ships for the 101st are being diverted from Jeddah to Yanbu. The 24th Infantry Division had some loading problems at the port in Savannah, but has it sorted out now? What kind of problems? The President interrupted. Just a bit of a logjam at Savannah. We've worked it out. It just took more time than we wanted. They're at sea now with 2 ships, and more will be loaded, Cheney explained. No one wanted to relate another issue that had come up in the loading, and the President didn't need to know. Sir, the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment has moved by rail from their home station to Galveston, Texas, and is in the process of loading there. The 197th Infantry Brigade is moving by rail from Fort Benning to Jacksonville, Florida. Headquarters, 16th. Airborne Corps at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, is flying out to Jeddah. The 11th Air Defense Artillery Brigade from Fort Bliss, Texas, is moving by rail to Beaumont, Texas. Headquarters, 3rd U.S. Army, located at Fort McPherson, Georgia, will fly from Atlanta to Muscat, Oman, and their advance party is already in place. The remainder of the units he's requested have been alerted and are preparing to move. The other additional heavy units will flow into Muscat with only the 101st and 82nd in Jeddah and possibly the 24th ID. Right now, sir, the problem is finding ships to move all the competing parts. Military Sea Lift Command is just not equipped to move all the competing parts at the same time. Transcom, the headquarters overall responsible for all the planes and ships to move stuff, as well as coordinating with the railroads, is supposed to have a 30-day planning window. We gave them 2 weeks. They're doing their best to make things happen. It's just going to take time, Cheney explained. Well, what are we talking about here, Dick? If we don't get some substantial forces over there now, the Iraqis will have kicked us out of the place, the President griped angrily. Sir, just in the first 30 days, we are estimating the movement of some 38,000 people by air, 123,000 tons of equipment and supplies by ships, and 40,000 tons of supplies and equipment by air, Cheney explained. It's going to take time to spool up the airplanes and ships to move all this. Okay, I get the picture, the President said defensively. Cheney continued, the Air Force assets in the fight at this time are the 71st and 500th Length Tactical Fighter Squadrons, presently located at Hurghada, Egypt, supporting the 82nd and 18th Airborne Corps. The 42nd Bomb Group, B-52s out of Loring, is currently at Diego Garcia. More squadrons are being called up. We'll have a more complete list to you at tomorrow's brief. General Schwarzkopf has also requested that the 4th Marine Expeditionary Brigade be assigned to Central Command as of the 11th. And like everyone else, we don't have the amphibious ships to support them completely just yet. How many ships do they need? Sir, the 4th MEB requires 24 ships, but only 9 are available due to maintenance scheduling and competing factors. We'll get it worked out, Mr. President. It may not be pretty, but we will get them there, Cheney assured him. How soon can we see Marine boots on the ground in Oman? I don't want to have the Iraqis think that they can roll in there as well. We need the flag planted and fast, said the President. General Powell answered, the first ships departed Morehead City on the 17th. The Marines should be there in about 2 weeks. The amphibious fleet in the Red Sea will join them once they arrive. We're hesitant about putting them ashore just yet until things have stabilized in Jeddah. we're going ahead and flying the 7th Marine Expeditionary Brigade from California to Sohar International Airport, along with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Brigade from Hawaii to Rustak Airport outside of Al Mudaik, where the Oman Navy stages out of. Both brigades will land in Oman and join up with the pre-positioned stock from Diego Garcia, which will include their LAV and heavy equipment. We're coordinating with the Omani government as to where they will go once the deployment is complete. Oman has offered Masaira Island for a possible staging area for one Marine division. The other option is to be placed in some sort of blocking position near the Omani-Saudi border. The Commandant of the Corps gave Powell the stink eye when he answered what obviously should have been his question. He didn't need Powell answering for him. Cutting Powell off before he could steal any more of his thunder, he interjected, "Discussions with General Schwarzkopf indicate that the first pre-PO ships will offload in Lifa, Oman, and the Sohar port. There's a major highway that comes out of Al Ain, UAE, through some very rugged terrain. The initial force will move to block that highway and prevent the Iraqis from attacking into Oman." "Well, it sounds like we're moving in the right direction. Tell me, General Dugan, how is the Air Force shaping up for this?" the President asked. "Sir, we currently have the 71st and 511th Tactical Fighter Squadrons in theater in Egypt, along with the 27th TAC Fighter Squadron. The 336th Tactical Fighter Squadron is landing as we speak in Thumrait, Oman. We currently have 5 fighter wings in the process of deploying and 13 other wings that have received alert notices for deployment. I expect by the end of September we will have approximately 1,800 aircraft operating in the theater, not counting what the Navy is bringing to the table or any aircraft from other nations supporting our position. At our next session, I'll have a slide listing all the wings by type of aircraft and a breakdown of the numbers," Dugan concluded and looked at his staff officer, who was writing notes and a tasking to get that slide made. "Tell me about our losses, though. When I was reading over the summary of the brief during breakfast, I saw our air losses had been pretty high. What's going on, Dugan?" Grimacing at the mention of the losses, Dugan replied, "Our pilots have been engaged in a lot of aerial battles. The Iraqi Air Force has been giving our pilots a real run for their money. We've also been encountering a very aggressive air defense system. They appear to have a lot more SA-6 systems than we had previously known about." At that, the President shot a glare at the CIA director as Dugan continued. "One real concern, however, was a recent set of reconnaissance photos a U-2 managed to capture around Riyadh. The Iraqis appeared to have acquired a Soviet SA-10 Grumble system. We're not sure how, but what we can clearly see on the photos is the missile system being deployed in various positions around Riyadh. We're now tasking our U-2s with trying to see if there are more SA-10s, and if so, where they are." General Dugan leaned forward as he explained, "If the Soviets are now giving the Iraqis SA-10s, then we're going to have a real problem going forward. These are deadly SAMs. This kind of system will take a very concerted level of effort to defeat. We're talking Tomahawk cruise missiles and a lot of complicated Wild Weasel missions." "Great. Sounds like more fun stuff to deal with. Keep me apprised, General Dugan. How about you, Carl? You have more surprises for me like Dugan?" General Carl Vuano, Chief of Staff for the Army, smiled as he shook his head. "Nothing we haven't already seen or run across. I have a list of additional assets Norm is asking for. Some of them are units in Germany, which may be a problem. I'm not sure if the Germans will want to see some of these forces be taken from NATO." General Vuono motioned for a slide, having anticipated this question. "Sir, these units have been requested, and as soon as Transcom can arrange the transportation, we'll start moving them to the respective ports. We also need to see about where we'll be basing them in Oman," General Vuono explained. The slide showed the following units being requested. Operation Desert Shield. Initial Ground Force Package. A2 to 3rd Airborne Division, Fort Bragg, 2nd 24th Infantry Division, Mechanized, Fort Stewart, GA. 197th Infantry Brigade, Mechanized, Fort Benning, GA. HQ, Sekretariatontium, Untum. Airborne Corps, Fort Bragg, NC. 101's Airborne Division, Air Assault, Fort Campbell, KY. 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, Fort Bliss, TX. 1st Cavalry Division, Fort Hood, TX. Warmer Brigade, 2nd Armored Division, Fort Hood, TX. 11 Air Defense Artillery Brigade, Fort Bliss, TX. Ill Corps Artillery, Fort Sill, OK. 1st Corps Support Command, Fort Bragg, NC. 13th Corps Support Command, Fort Hood, TX. 12th Combat Aviation Brigade, Germany. 3rd Armored Division Aviation Elements, Germany. 7th Medical Command, Germany. HQ, 3rd U.S. Army, Fort McPherson, GA. Do you think he'll be asking for more above this initial request? We have the 24th Infantry Division going, and I see the 1st Cavalry Division. But is that going to be enough heavy forces to kick the Iraqis out of Saudi and the Gulf states? Sir, it's my opinion that he's going to be requesting additional forces before this is over. Probably going to see a request for the 1st Armored Division, the 1st Infantry Division, and the 3rd Armored Division, unless, of course, Saddam comes to his senses. But I'm not going to hold my breath, General Vuono explained. Without saying anything, the President looked at Admiral Kelso, who knew that was his indicator to start talking. Mr. President, we currently have the USS Saratoga operating in the Red Sea, supporting the 10th Saudi Mechanized Brigade. In the Arabian Sea, we have the USS Kennedy. The USS Midway is in Yokosuka and is preparing to get underway, and the Ranger is in port at San Diego, also preparing. The America is on station in the North Atlantic, and the Roosevelt is in refit, but should be ready by the end of the month. Both battleships are in home ports on the East Coast and West Coast, and are preparing to come out with their battle groups. With the Kennedy Strike Group, we have 3 cruisers, 6 destroyers, and 6 frigates that are on normal rotational assignments right now, and would likely need to be extended if we wanted to include them. The 8 amphibious assault ships are either en route or loading and departing in the next 24 hours. As you know, we have 13 boats at sea right now, with 1 in position to strike with Tomahawk cruise missile if so order. Let's hold off on hitting inside Iraq proper. I'm hoping that if our air and ground forces can do enough damage, Saddam may see the folly of his ways and pull them back to Iraq. Jim, be sure we're pounding the UN on this fact. Saddam has got to leave Kuwait, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. No ifs, ands, or buts. Have you heard from Mubarak about Egyptian ground forces, or from the Brits? The President asked. I spoke to the Egyptian foreign minister before coming in here. The Egyptians have placed 1 heavy division on alert to move to the coast and will begin embarkation procedures in a week, Baker said, igniting smiles around the room. As for the Brits, they're sending naval and ground forces. Sir Douglas Hurd, the Foreign Secretary, told me that they're recalling Parliament on September 6th to put it to a vote. In the meantime, forces have been alerted for deployment, Baker said, again generating smiles and murmurs around the room. Pleased with the news, the President turned to his Secretary of Energy, retired Admiral James Watkins. Admiral, how are we doing on energy? Oil production is running at max capacity. The price of oil has also been on the rise since this started. There doesn't appear to be any panic just yet. Our strategic reserves are at acceptable levels. The North Sea fields are meeting the needs of most of Europe, with a few exceptions for the time being. I don't foresee us having to go to a rationing program at this time. Our European friends are a bit worried, and the Russians have made some generous overtures to sell them oil. At our expense, of course. Alaskan crude is sufficient to meet the needs of Japan and the Far East. That's all I have, Mr. President, Watkins concluded. How is the presidential call-up of the reserves being received? I haven't heard any complaints in the press, the president said. Sir, Cheney said, we have only one problem. And what is that? The president asked in a resigned voice. We have more volunteers than we have positions to fill. We filled the 100,000 slots in about 72 hours with almost all volunteers, and plenty more are knocking on the door wanting to come on board. Our recruiters are having no problems filling quotas this month either. The nation has really gotten behind us on this one. If I may, Mr. President, said Marlin Fitzwater, the White House press secretary, nodding towards the television at the end of the table. Of course, replied the president. Fitzwater nodded to an aide, who turned on the television. The press secretary's office had queued up a news story from CNN. On the screen, CNN anchor Bernard Shaw sat at his desk with a "Crisis in the Gulf" graphic over his left shoulder. He delivered his lead-in. Today, in cities across the nation, support for our armed forces has achieved levels last seen at the end of the Second World War. Robert Vito in San Diego, California, has more. The scene flipped to a reporter standing in front of a building with a red Spanish tile roof that was ubiquitous in Southern California. This is Robert Vito, reporting from San Diego. In a scene that is playing out across San Diego and indeed cities across the nation, the line of potential recruits at this Navy recruiting station runs out the door. The influx of young men and women volunteering for military service is outpacing the ability of the recruiters to process them. While this outpouring of volunteers can't be boiled down to a single factor, we took the time to ask some of the men and women here at the National City Navy Recruiting Office about their motivation. Robert walked over to a young woman standing in line. Miss, why are you in line here today? Meg, I just don't like what's going on in the Middle East. Kuwait and Saudi Arabia are our allies, and we can't let this Saddam push them around over there. I mean, if we're not going to stand up for our friends, what do we stand for? Robert shifted the microphone to the next volunteer in line. And you, sir, why are you joining the Navy today? The boy looked into his eyes, unsure how much to tell him. My uncles both fought in Vietnam, and I always felt that if the time came, I'd join up to do my part too. This is the time, so I'm here to do my part. The reporter stepped away from the line and addressed the camera. Support for our military efforts goes beyond this influx of volunteers. Just a few miles down the road, a massive rally of supporters has converged outside the gates of the North Island Naval Air Station, where the USS Ranger is preparing to depart for the Persian Gulf. The image shifted to the area just outside the Naval Air Station. A large crowd had gathered with signs that read, "We support our troops, God bless America, and wide awake." The latter was a reference to President Bush's remark that the Iraqis had invaded Saudi Arabia while America slept. It had become an unofficial slogan of support for the military effort. The screen faded out. Mr. President, said Fitzwater, we have people lining the interstates and cheering the convoys of military vehicles moving to the ports. Truck stops and rest stops are full of people serving coffee, soda, and food to the soldiers along the routes. We haven't seen support for a military action like this since 1945. What about anti-war protests? Surely we're seeing something there? Asked the president. Yes, sir, replied Fitzwater. There are protests at the UN headquarters building in New York. About 100 people asking us to give peace a chance. And there was a march outside the federal building in San Francisco, but nothing compared to the outpouring of support we're seeing. Well, that's good to hear, said the president. The last thing we need is mass demonstrations like what we had during Vietnam. With that said, we need to keep the press on our side. If we keep taking losses like these, he gestured towards the file in front of General Powell, there'll be plenty of protests and we'll lose any goodwill we have from the media. Marlon, I need you to figure out how to break the news of these losses. The president stood and turned to look out the window over the south lawn. We can't let this turn into another Vietnam, gentlemen. If we can't take the initiative in this battle, that's exactly what we're risking. Chapter 49. Knock on the door. 24th August, 1990. Naval Air Station Oceana, Virginia Beach, Virginia. Virginia in the late summer was hot and humid. Kids were thinking about back-to-school shopping for school clothes, but still getting in some beach time. Oceana Naval Air Station was relatively quiet, as almost every aircraft had departed and joined the fleet. A few hangar queens could be heard throughout the day, but the noise at night was absent. Some news had gotten back to the families through the wives, rumors mostly being built on the nightly news. Nothing had been confirmed outside the nightly news broadcasts, which were providing broad stroke coverage of the day's events in the Middle East, but nothing specific. Lieutenant Harry Morgan, an F-14 pilot with VF-74 aboard the USS Saratoga, had only been recently assigned to VF-74, having moved from Pensacola Naval Air Station. He had enough time to unpack boxes, hang pictures, and hook up the TV before he had to depart with the squadron to join the ship. Shortly after they were aboard, Saddam entered Kuwait. His wife, Beverly, was getting settled into life at Oceana Air Station. They were fortunate to get on-base quarters with only a 1-month delay. It was not uncommon to have to wait as much as a year to get base housing. The boys, Jordan and Derek, aged 7 and 8, had adapted pretty quickly to the neighborhood, which was typical of military brats. On day 1, they had acquired 3 friends who would probably be in the same class as them at the Department of Defense dependent school that was on the base. Beverly and Harry liked the boys attending the DODDS, as the school had money to maintain the buildings, provide quality education with quality teachers. The other thing they liked was the fact that the boys had friends of every race, creed, religion, and income level at the school. There was no discrimination among military brats. They were all in the same boat, and they knew it. "Mom, someone's at the door," Jordan called out as he and Derek sat on the living room floor, glued to the Nintendo game Super Mario Bros. 3. "Derek, answer the door and see who it is. I'm fixing dinner," Beverly called from the kitchen. "Ma," Derek sounded off. "Derek, don't make me come in there. Answer the door," Beverly commanded. "Yes, ma'am." Derek got up off the floor and went to the door. When he opened it, he saw 2 Navy officers standing in the door, and a lady that he'd recently met but couldn't remember where. Her husband was in the squadron, but Derek didn't know what he did. "Hi, Derek. Is your mom home?" the lady asked. "You probably don't remember me, but I'm Mrs. Lovett, your dad's commanding officer." "Yes, ma'am. She's in the kitchen. Sorry, I remembered your face, but not your name. Do you want to see my mom?" Derek asked with some trepidation. "Yes. Could you ask her if we could come in?" "Just a minute and I'll go ask her," Derek said, anxious to get back to his game. He ran to the kitchen. "Mom, Mrs. Lovett is here and wants to see you," Derek said, just knowing his brother was cheating in the game. "Well, let her in. Don't keep her waiting," Beverly told him as she started to wash the flour off her hands. As she did, Derek made a beeline to the front door and pushed open the screen. One of the officers took the door, and Mrs. Lovett entered first. Derek headed into the living room as Beverly came out of the kitchen. She spotted Mrs. Lovett right away. "Helen, to what do I owe?" Her face changed from a smile to an expression of shock when she saw the 2 officers, one a Navy chaplain, the other another pilot. "No, no, no!" Beverly yelled. Derek and Jordan suddenly lost all interest in the Nintendo game and looked at their mother, who was now in tears. Helen quickly came over and hugged her. "Beverly, it's not what you're thinking. He's missing in action, and that's all we know at this point. Come, let's sit down," Helen said, guiding Beverly to the couch. "Boys, come over here and sit with your mom. We all need to talk, okay?" As Beverly and the boys sat down, Helen began with introductions. "This is Chaplain Flanagan, our Catholic chaplain on base." The Navy captain nodded, acknowledging the introduction. "And this is Commander Forrest, the rear detachment commander for the ship." He likewise nodded. It was obvious that Helen was in charge at this point. "Now, Beverly, boys, Commander Forrest is going to tell you the facts, as we understand them right now. Commander," Helen directed, "yesterday your husband's squadron was flying cover for an airstrike going in over Saudi Arabia. The Iraqis engaged them with fighter aircraft and air defense weapons. Reports indicate that your husband downed 2 Iraqi jets before his aircraft was hit. He ejected before the aircraft exploded. His wingman reported seeing 2 parachutes, and both opened properly. It appeared he landed safely but behind Iraqi lines. A search was launched, but due to the air defense and number of Iraqi soldiers in the area, they couldn't locate him. There have been no communications on his survival radio either, which leads us to believe he may have been captured. Until his capture or death is confirmed, we are listing him as missing in action," Commander Forrest explained. "What do I do now?" Beverly asked between soft sobs, holding the boys tight to her sides. "Mrs. Morgan, you don't worry about anything at this point," Chaplain Flanagan said. "The family support group has been notified. I will serve as your survivor assistance officer and take care of everything that has to do with the military. There is one thing we need to consider soon. As missing in action status is what your husband has now, his take-home pay is cut to 55%, with the remainder being held in a government account for him. If you need to increase that, we can, but we have to get some paperwork started for that. We can do that in the coming days, but you need to think about what you want to do," Flanagan explained. "What? Why in the hell would the military do that?" Beverly asked in frustration. "It seems that during Vietnam, wives of missing in action personnel received full pay. When former POWs returned home, they came to find that the wives had gone through all the money and filed for divorce. The husbands were left penniless. In at least one case, the wife even filed in the divorce for half the officer's retired pay and got it. Claimed he'd abandoned the family and the court bought it," Flanagan said. "Beverly, don't you worry about a thing. We're all with you. And you won't be the only one, I fear," Helen said, patting Beverly on the knee. Chapter 50. Duel in the Dark. 2nd September, 1990. 3rd Squadron. Western Saudi Arabia. The plan was simple. But aren't they all? The problem always comes down to execution. In this case, the plan called for a multi-pronged, massive airstrike against multiple Saudi and American positions, in hopes that some of the strikes would slip through the American air cover. For Major Vitaly Popkov and his squadron of 16 MiG-29 Fulcrums, they would be flying cover for a squadron of Su-24s as they made a mad dash for the American buildup around the Jeddah International Airport, and a squadron of Su-25s looking to carry out some CAS missions along the Iraqi-American lines. The Americans were still reeling from the previous day's ground assaults, so the Iraqi Air Force wanted to keep the pressure on. For his part, Popkov had broken his squadron down into 8 flights of 2. His thinking was this would force the Americans to have to divide their forces to try and go after his pilots. After the last month of aerial combat, he'd developed a handful of tactics and formations, all in hopes of gaining an advantage against the Americans. The last time Soviet pilots had flown against the Americans was during the Vietnam War. The number of Soviet pilots back home volunteering to be a part of this off-books expeditionary mission was through the roof. Still, it was dangerous work. The Americans had better support than they did. 10 minutes into their flight, the Su-24s were now 15 minutes from the target. As they got closer to the airport and the coast, their passive radars started to pick up an enemy E-3 sentry. Its powerful search radars had found them. The only problem for Popkov was the damn things were flying a racetrack formation on the opposite side of the Red Sea, with a carrier battle group between him and them. The damn sentries allowed the American aircraft to keep their active radars off longer, thus helping them get in much closer to the Iraqis before they knew they were even there. Then his radio crackled to life. "Strela Leader, Strela 2. I'm being lit up by an E-2 Hawkeye near that American carrier, requesting permission to go active with my radar," came the call from his lead element. He'd put his best pilots in the lead element, knowing they'd be the first to make contact with the Americans. If they were being painted by the E-2s, then chances were some fighters were being vectored towards them. Depressing the talk button, he replied, "Strela 2, Strela Leader, understood. You are cleared to engage. Happy hunting, out." He switched his radio frequency. "Gonchik Leader, Strela Leader, we're going active with our radars. Good hunting." A moment later, Popkov heard 2 squawks on the radio, letting him know the Gonchik teams were moving to engage. The Gonchik teams consisted of 8 MiG-25 Foxbats that would now rise up from 50 meters in altitude to around 7,500 meters and go supersonic in their race out to sea. They were tasked with going after the E-2 and possibly even the E-3, if they could catch it. The threat to the American airborne early warning aircraft would force them to divert some of their fighters to defend them, leaving fewer fighters to provide cover over the airport or the current front line. The Foxbats might even get lucky and get a few shots off with their long-range missiles and bag them. The supersonic interceptors were clumsy rockets, but they were damn fast and hard for the Americans to catch. In the morning, hours after their duel in the dark, the ground forces would make another hard push to dislodge the American paratroopers and hopefully throw them into the sea. Looking down at his own radar scope, Popkov saw 2 pairs of F-14s flying near Medina were attempting to give chase and go after the Foxbats. Additional F-14s flying over the carrier were now being vectored after the Foxbats. The 2 pairs of F-15s flying over the Jeddah International Airport were going after his lead aircraft. Then, right on cue, Major Konstantin Kostya Ayushiev's flight of 4 MiG-29s made their move to engage the F-14s as they diverted to chase the Foxbats. The fight's on. "It's time to earn our bonuses," Popkov thought, as he gave his aircraft some thrust and started heading towards the F-15s. Flying just 50 meters above the ground, the F-15s hadn't spotted him yet. They were busy engaging Strela 1 and 2, just as he had engineered to happen. When he'd gotten within 18 kilometers of the first F-15, he pulled up on his stick and angled his aircraft towards the trailing 2 F-15s, flying cover for the 2 currently chasing down Strela 1 and 2. Popkov activated 2 of his R-73 infrared homing missiles, placing the targeting reticle on one of the F-15s just long enough for the missile tone to let him know it had a lock. Once it did, he pickled off the first missile, then the second, at the same target. In fractions of a second, the blackness of night around him momentarily lit up as the solid fuel rocket engine ignited and took off after its intended target. The F-15 he'd just locked up and fired on immediately took evasive maneuvers, banking hard to the right as he started to pop off some flares in an attempt to throw off his heat-seeker missiles. Popkov felt incredibly proud when, moments later, his wingman, not hesitating in the least, had also pickled off 2 of his own missiles at the American's wingman. In seconds, they had 4 missiles racing after the American aircraft. Giving his aircraft some additional power, Popkov dove to the right to give chase to the American he had just fired on. He saw his first missile get spoofed by the Yankees' countermeasures and blew up when it hit one of the flares. Not wanting to let this one get away, Popkov switched on his R-27 active radar homing missiles. He had to fight a little bit, but he kept the targeting reticle on it long enough for it to get a solid lock. He fired. Moments later, his second R-73 missed the F-15 and flew off harmlessly from a brilliant maneuver the American pilot had pulled off. That miss only confirmed his earlier decision to fire a third missile at the F-15. Then he saw a bright flash somewhere off to his 11 o'clock position. Looking in that direction, he saw it had come from one of the fighters. Which one he wasn't sure just yet. A handful of bright red objects zipped right past his canopy, forcing him to dive to the left to avoid whatever was shooting at him. Before he could react to whatever had just shot at him, his Berioza or radar warning receiver started blaring in his ear, letting him know that some sort of missile was attempting to lock onto him. Then his RWR shouted a new warning. A missile had been fired at him. Looking down at his scope, he saw the missile had originated from one of the F-15s. It was racing towards him quickly, almost too quickly. Pulling back on his flight controls, Popkov attempted to gain some altitude, as he'd wandered a bit too close to the ground when he had chased after that other American fighter. A flash occurred somewhere to his right. It was in the direction of the fighter he had fired on earlier, but he wasn't sure if it had been his missile that hit it, or if another fighter had blown up. Warning, 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 kept blaring in his headset. That damn missile is fast, he thought, as he banked his aircraft to the right while dispensing a couple of flares. Another flash occurred somewhere behind him. His aircraft was momentarily buffeted by the concussion of the blast. I'm alive. That's all that matters, he briefly thought, as he pulled up hard on his flight controls and nearly cut his throttle. His fulcrum flared up almost vertically in a Pugachev's Cobra maneuver as it practically hovered momentarily in the air. Seconds later, the F-15 that had just fired at him zipped right past him, with both its engines lit up as the pilot tried to put as much distance between them as humanly possible. Popkov pushed his throttle to the wall, sending a rush of fuel to his engines, reigniting them with a renewed fury. He activated one of his R-73 heat-seeker missiles, and while tracking the large American fighter visually, the missile's seeker gained a lock on the aircraft. He depressed the firing button on the side of his flight stick, firing his fourth missile of the morning. His missile leapt from its rail and raced ahead of him after the two red-hot, glowing Pratt & Whitney F-100 engines, still in full afterburner mode. Seconds later, the 7.4-kilogram warhead had gotten within its proximity range and detonated. It fired essentially an aerial shotgun blast of steel ball bearings right into the rear of the F-15's tail, shredding its left engine, vertical tail stabilizers, and wing. A trail of smoke and some flames followed in the aircraft's wake, as the pilot was clearly struggling to maintain control of the stricken plane. The American had turned the plane to head towards the international airport, likely in hopes of getting closer to friendly lines before he had to eject. Then the fire around the engine of the plane winked out, probably from the aircraft's internal fire suppression system. Popkov watched as the pilot deftly maneuvered his stricken plane towards the international airport, presumably wanting to save his aircraft. That was when Popkov knew he needed to finish this guy off. He wasn't about to let him land the wounded plane, only to possibly get it airborne again later to kill Popkov or his buddies. Dropping in behind the F-15, he switched his weapon systems over from missiles to his gun system. With his 30mm autocannon activated, he lined up his gun sights on the one operational engine on the Eagle and depressed the trigger only long enough to send a handful of his 150 rounds into the rear of the aircraft. His goal wasn't to try and kill the pilot, who'd fought gallantly. He just wanted to remove him from being a threat. When his handful of 30mm projectiles slammed into the plane, it ripped a couple pieces of metal from the aircraft. Then the plane suddenly burst into flames and exploded. This sudden eruption of fire and bright flash momentarily stunned Popkov. He hadn't intended on killing the enemy flyer, only to force the pilot to eject. Then his radio crackled. "Strela Leader, Strela 2. I think it's time for us to get out of here," came the voice of his second-in-command. "Congrats on the kill." "That makes 8. "Agreed. We've done what we came here to do. Let's get out of here." Turning to head back home, Popkov tried to do a quick head count. He'd started the mission with 16 fighters. He was returning with 9. Talking briefly with his pilots, he learned they'd scored 7 kills of their own. He'd check with the Foxbat commander when they returned to see how they'd fared. Seeing that the E-2 Hawkeye wasn't lighting them up meant they'd likely taken it out. How many F-14s they had managed to nail in the process was a different story. Nearing the aerodrome, Popkov lined up for his approach and made one of the best landings he'd ever made. The adrenaline from this battle was still coursing through his veins. Once he'd parked his aircraft and was able to climb out, the first thing he did was walk to a nearby maintenance vehicle and relieve himself on the tarmac. When he entered the operations center to begin his debrief, Popkov learned they'd lost a single Su-25s during the raid, while 3 Su-24s were lost over the airport. As he sat in the debriefing room, it dawned on him that the Battle of Jeddah would likely go down as one of the largest aerial battles in decades. While he was feeling a bit euphoric over the results and his own aerial kills, he knew once the Americans were able to move more squadrons into the area, these kinds of battles wouldn't be as easy to pull off. "I hope the Iraqis can secure a settlement that benefits them soon," he thought. "Winning will be a lot harder once the American juggernaut starts moving in our direction. I just hope I can survive long enough for this war to end." The end. Invitation to continue the action. We hope you have enjoyed reading Project 19. If you are hungry for more, you are in luck. The next book of the Crisis in the Desert series, titled Desert Shield, is available. You can find it at most retailers and on our website, www.frontlinepublishingangst.com. Did you know you can get all 3 books in Crisis in the Desert, the complete series Books 1, 3, about the author Matt Jackson? Matt Jackson enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1968 and served on active duty until 1993, when he retired as a colonel. In the course of his career, he commanded 2 infantry companies, one being an airborne company in Alaska. He also commanded an air assault infantry battalion during Operation Desert Shield, Storm, with the 101st Airborne Division. Staff assignments with troops included operations officer in an air cavalry squadron, operations officer in a light infantry battalion, and executive officer of an air assault infantry brigade. When not with troop assignments, Matt Jackson was generally found teaching tactics at the United States Army Infantry Center or the United States Army Command and General Staff College, with a follow-on assignment as an exchange instructor at the German Army Tactics Center. His last assignment was Director, Readiness and Mobilization, J5, Forces Command, and Special Advisor, Vice President of the United States. Upon retiring from the U.S. Army, he went into private business. He and his wife of 50 years have 2 sons, both Army officers. About the author James Rosone. James Rosone started his military career in 1996 as a communications specialist with a self-propelled 155mm howitzer unit. He was later cross-trained into becoming a forward observer for the artillery guns. James then transitioned from the Army to the U.S. Air Force in 2004, where he went on to serve as a human intelligence collector. In this job, he worked as an interrogator throughout Operation Iraqi Freedom, interrogating senior-level al-Qaeda members and other terrorists, insurgents, and former regime members. James would go on to work as a government contractor in intelligence for the Department of State and Defense in the Middle East, Eurasia, and Europe, continuing the hunt for Islamic extremists, transnational terrorists, and criminal organizations. In 2015, James began writing as a form of PTSD therapy, publishing his debut novel in 2016. He has since gone on to publish more than 20 highly successful books in the thriller and science fiction genres. James's most current military thriller series is The Monroe Doctrine, which explores what would happen if China were to encroach on countries in the Western Hemisphere. James now works to mentor other veterans struggling with PTSD through writing therapy, teaching them how to become successful authors so that they can write to support their families. You can learn more about James at his website, www.frontlinepublishinginc.com, or join his mailing list to stay up to date on new releases or sales. Acknowledgements. I would like to thank all the great leaders and soldiers I served with during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. There were so many, but I'd especially like to acknowledge the soldiers and non-commissioned officers of the 3rd Battalion, 327th Infantry. The Army authorized me to command the battalion, but they gave me the privilege of command. Great leaders provided guidance and mentorship throughout my time, and I am forever grateful to General Binford P., CG, 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault, and General Hugh Shelton, Assistant Division Commander for Operations, 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault. I would be remiss if I did not thank General Mike Oates, who was a major during Operation Desert Shield, Chirtart's Storm, in the division. All are retired now, but still provide guidance and mentorship to today's leaders. Lastly, I would like to thank my wife, who held up the home front for the past 50 years, and my 2 fine sons that carried on the family tradition. Matt Jackson. This has been Project 19, Book 1 of the Crisis in the Desert series. By Matt Jackson and James Rosone. 2021, James Rosone and Matt Jackson. Published in conjunction with Frontline Publishing, Income Production 11labs.io 2025.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.